Thanks everyone for joining this live stream. This is a Q&A, so I'm just gonna let you guys ask any questions that you have for the next hour or so. How do you respond to the argument that there is leather in your car? Interesting. You can explain to them, if you purchased the car when you were not vegan, then that is your explanation. And unless you can afford to replace your car, an all vegan car with all vegan interior and leather and everything, then that's the reality of it. We do live in a non-vegan world, so sometimes it may not be practical or possible to avoid things like leather. We should do our best to avoid it, but if you bought a car when you were not vegan and there's leather in it, a car is not the same as a handbag. Obviously it's different. Like a handbag may cost you $50 to replace, so you could easily do that. You can get rid of your old leather handbag and then you can replace it with a vegan one with like $50 or $100. But a car, you're gonna need maybe thousands of dollars, so it's not as practical, and that should be your response. So you do your best to avoid animal exploitation. That means that all products that come from animals or are tested on animals. But then sometimes you might find yourself in a situation where you have already purchased something and you can't afford to replace it just yet. And it is what it is, you know? I'm guessing that people would use that against you, like your non-vegan friends would say that because they don't want to go vegan, and they're going to say, well, you're not vegan yourself because you've got leather in your car. First of all, you can definitely find non-leather seats in the car. Not every single car has leather or animal products in it. But also what you should say to them after explaining your situation with your car, you should say, I am doing my best to avoid animal exploitation. How does that justify you paying for animals to be killed for every single meal that you have every single day? I noticed in some products is written that it may contain milk. As vegans, do we consume it? That's a really good question, because I think that's something that new vegans always struggle with, and I definitely did when I first went vegan. When they say it may contain something, and it's usually milk, eggs, nuts. Nuts obviously has nothing to do with veganism, but they put that on the packaging because that's an allergy thing. So if you are allergic to nuts, for example, they have to put it on there. And that means that whatever you're eating vegan chocolate or whatever, that product was produced in a facility that also deals with something with nuts or milk or eggs. So they have to legally put that on the label in case you're deadly allergic to it and something happens to you. So they have already informed you about it. But it's got nothing to do with veganism. I'm sure there might be some people that prefer not to eat those products, but as a vegan you can still eat them, because that means that the machines that are used to produce that chocolate, for example, also is used to produce things that have milk in them or eggs. So it's still vegan. This is about the comment. Technically, even if that specific chocolate is vegan, if you pay for it, you're basically paying that specific factory or company and helping them to continue doing what they're doing, using milk or eggs for their other products. So while I understand what you're saying, with that logic and that mindset, you have to go and live out in the jungle somewhere and just eat the fruit that you're growing, because all the supermarkets that we shop from are owned by non-vegan companies or people. All the supermarkets, the big supermarkets, are stocking non-vegan products. Maybe 1 to 5% of their products are vegan, but 95% plus is non-vegan products. So you could say the same thing. You could say, when you go to your local supermarket and you buy a vegan ice cream, you're supporting that company, so they're going to continue to stock non-vegan products. With that logic, you just can't live in a non-vegan world. The point here is that we continue to buy these vegan products from non-vegan companies as well to create demand for those specific products. And we do understand that they're going to continue to produce non-vegan products as well. But that's all we can do. We can create demand for those specific vegan products. Same thing with going to a non-vegan restaurant. If you go to a non-vegan restaurant and you order a vegan meal, you know that you're supporting that restaurant to continue operating, but you're also creating demand for that specific meal that you ordered. So it's just how it is. That's how it works living as a vegan in a non-vegan world. How do you get people to listen to you, like family members and friends? Nobody listens to me. Well, with family members and friends, you just need to do the same. You just need to keep talking to them just like you do with a stranger. And if they're ready, they will listen. Just keep talking to them. Just keep asking questions. Keep showing them the truth of what happens to the animals. Show them the footage that we use at the Cube. Show them documentaries. And just create a conversation with them. And hopefully they are ready to have that conversation with you. But other than that, you can't do anything. If someone's not ready or willing to have that conversation with you, you just can't force them. So treat them like any other person that you will speak to on the streets. I don't think your family or friends should get a different treatment. Just keep talking to them, just keep bringing it up, and if they're ready, they'll have the conversation with you. I'm afraid I'll go back to eating animals. How do I stay vegan forever? I'm guessing that you're not vegan, because if you're vegan, you wouldn't say that. I'm not sure if you're trolling or you're just plant-based, but someone who is vegan is someone who has been convinced that animal cruelty is wrong and they don't want to be a part of it. So no matter what, they will stay away from animal exploitation. Again, as much as possible and practicable, meaning sometimes it's just not possible to avoid it because we live in a non-vegan world. For example, that person might need to take some medication that was tested on animals. But other than that, a vegan knows that they can't justify animals being tortured, raped, and murdered for any reason. So they're not going to pay for that. If you're vegan already, then you would be feeling the same way. If you're just plant-based and you're doing it for health reasons or other reasons, then you need to look into the ethics and understand what veganism actually means. But those people that say, I was vegan and I'm not anymore, those ex-vegans, they were just plant-based people. They were not vegan. Once you go vegan, you can never go back. So if anyone says to you that they were vegan for 5 years and they went back, they were just plant-based. It's like saying, I was a racist once and then I went to being a non-racist and then I'm back to being a racist again. If you were convinced that being a racist is wrong, then you're not going to go back to it. And veganism is the same. You're not going to go back to supporting animal exploitation. People say I take medications that are not vegan, calling me a hypocrite and saying I can't judge them. Again, because we do live in a non-vegan world, that means that vegans are the minority still. So most products that are produced in this world are either made with animal products or are tested on animals, including medication. All the pharmaceutical drugs are tested on animals, and sometimes they have animal products in them, like gelatin, for example. So to be vegan, you do your best to avoid those products, but sometimes you might have to take a medication because you rely on it. And that's when you have to decide whether you can justify doing that or not. But if you can't find a replacement for that medication that is vegan, then you're going to take it. If people call you a hypocrite for doing that, then just ask them the question, I have to take this medication because otherwise this is what would happen to me. How does that justify you paying for animals to be stabbed in their throat for a sandwich? You're doing your best to avoid animal cruelty, and there might be times where you can't because the medication that you need to take doesn't exist in a vegan form. So you just have to do that. But how does that justify them paying for animals to be tortured, raped, and killed so they can sit down to a meal and eat a burger for 5 minutes? How is that the same thing? They would have the option to go for the vegan burger, for the vegan alternative to whatever they're eating or using. even if we're not talking about food, if we're talking about clothing or other products like makeup or skin products or shampoos, whatever it might be, there's always a vegan alternative to that, and it's easy to find it, depending on where you live, obviously. But in most places, for food, it's super easy. Other products, still you can find it. But when it comes to medication, sometimes it's impossible. Hi Sal, I'd like to start activism, but I'm a sensitive person and cannot manage to watch Dominion yet. Should I wait until I'm ready? I think you should not wait. I think you should start doing activism. I understand that you're sensitive and the footage will upset you. I haven't watched Dominion myself yet, and I'm not going to watch Dominion. I've never watched Earthlings either. So I don't think that we have to watch these documentaries or footage. Even the footage that we show at the Cube, sometimes you may have to look at the screen, but I don't think that you have to force yourself to watch it. If you're convinced that you want to be vegan and that's the right thing to do, which sounds like you have, and you want to be active and speak up for the animals, then you just do that. So if by starting activism you mean going to the Cube, then what you can do is you can stand in the Cube and you don't have to watch the footage at all. When you come out of the Cube to take a break, you can go away from the Cube. I mean, we do recommend that you do that anyway. And after a few events, when you start to feel confident to do outreach, then you can start doing outreach. And while you're doing outreach, you may sometimes need to look at the screen because the bystander that you're talking to might ask a specific question about that scene. So they might point at it and be like, what's happening there? And you do have to look at the screen to be able to tell them whatever's happening. It might be just for a few seconds. And I think you just need to think about this with yourself. You need to think, well, I could start doing activism and I could be speaking up for the animals. I could create change, and think about whether that is more important to you than kind of protecting yourself from time to time having to watch the footage for a few seconds. When I'm outreaching, I try not to look at the screen either. It's very painful. And sometimes I do have to, because the person would ask me a question and I have to look at it. Or sometimes, this is a trick, this is something I do. So when I approach someone at the start of the conversation, they're still watching. While they're watching, I look at the Cube and I pretend like I'm watching it with them. And every now and then I just have a quick look at the screen to see what's happening so I can ask a relevant question. But I just look like over their screen. I just look at the cubers and I just look around. So I'm not constantly looking at the screen. So that's a little trick if you find it difficult to look at the screen the whole time you're outreaching. But I do recommend that you do get active because animals do need us. And we don't have enough activists right now. How should I tell my family that I won't be sitting with them when they eat animals? Say, look, I've been vegan for this many years or this many months, and I have come to the conclusion that because of my values and the fact that I'm against animal exploitation, I just cannot sit with people that are supporting animal exploitation. I can't be present when that's happening, and I can't just sit there and do nothing about it. So if you want to eat with me and you want to hang out with me, then I would like for everyone to eat a vegan meal. Otherwise, I won't be able to sit with you, and this is the reason why. Basically, that's what I would say to them. You're giving them the option to choose whether they want to continue eating animal products for that one meal that they are with you. I'm not sure if you live with your family or not, but regardless, they can choose whether they want to hang out with you and they value that over eating dead bodies of animals, or they don't want to change that, and that's their choice. When non-vegans say that they tried to go vegan and they got really sick, basically, how can I convince them? When someone says I went vegan for 3 months and I got really sick, first of all, you have to tell them you can't go vegan and go back from being vegan. Veganism is not something that you try. It's not a trend that you follow for some time. Again, like any form of injustice, when you're convinced that you want to be against it, you take a stance and you stick to it. So once you go vegan, you never go back. These people tried a plant-based diet, and this is important because especially when someone does it for health, they're only referring to the diet aspect. Why? Because a leather handbag or leather shoes doesn't affect your health in any way, your physical health. So they are only talking about diet, what they put in their bodies, and that's why it's a plant-based diet. And most of those people were not doing other things that goes into veganism anyway, so they would be just eating a plant-based diet. That's one thing that you also need to clarify for them. When it comes to veganism, diet is only one aspect. But for these people, a plant-based diet is what they tried. And when you go plant-based, there are many ways that you could do it. So you could eat like plant-based burgers and ice cream and cheese, or you could eat whole foods, or you could eat mainly whole foods, or you could just be raw and only eat raw like fruits and vegetables. So there are many ways that you could do a plant-based diet. Also, a plant-based diet is very vague because sometimes people that are plant-based are still consuming honey, and sometimes they might eat eggs or fish or whatever. They just call themselves plant-based because there's no like clear explanation on what a plant-based diet is. People can just use it loosely, and even if someone did it 100% plant-based, like I said, they can do it different ways. So it's that person's responsibility how they do it, and if they get sick, it's only that person's responsibility because they didn't do it right. So you can't blame veganism for that, because first of all, that person is not vegan. The diet is a plant-based diet. The diet is not called a vegan diet. That diet is just eating plant-based food, nothing that comes from an animal. And if that person was eating a plant-based diet that was full of oil and processed sugar and junk food, then of course they're going to get sick. Also, it depends how long they did it for. So maybe they didn't stick to it for a long time, even if they were doing a really healthy, balanced diet like whole foods. So a whole foods plant-based diet, they say, is the healthiest diet for anyone, regardless of their age, their condition. It can even help to reverse a lot of the chronic diseases and different health conditions. So that's how you know this person is not being honest. Maybe they tried it for a few weeks or a month and they were just eating shit. When you change your diet, sometimes you need to take supplements. So that person again is responsible to go and do a blood test to make sure that they're getting everything that they need to be getting. And they need to do a bit of research to know what they need to be eating for those specific nutrients and vitamins and minerals. And if they're not getting it from their diet, then they need to go and take a supplement. Again, it's just 100% up to that person how they do it. And if they failed, if they lost weight, if they got sick for whatever reason, which usually they're just saying that because they just felt different in their body. But if their iron dropped, whatever happened is that person's fault. And they just need to go and do their research and address that correctly. So that's what you need to say to those people. What do you think of vegetarians who become vegetarians for the animals? The vegetarian that becomes a vegetarian for the animals is either not educated on what happens to animals in other industries other than the meat industry. So they don't know what happens in the dairy and egg industries. Or they're just a hypocrite and they're lazy and they don't want to be fully against animal exploitation. So it's either one of these two. If somebody is just not educated and they don't know, they really don't know, then they should be educated, because going vegetarian doesn't help the animals, because the animals are still being tortured, raped and killed in the dairy industry and in the egg industry. So if this vegetarian does consume dairy and eggs, if they consume things like gelatin, like honey, if they buy products that are tested on animals, if they take anything that contains animal products in there, if they wear animal skin, then all of this stuff still is supporting animal exploitation. So that person is not doing anything for the animals. A lot of time people just want to do something and they say, okay, I'm going to go vegetarian, but they're not even willing to look at what happens in the dairy industry, for example. So that's why they are hypocrites, because they say I'm doing this for the animals, but they're only doing it for some animals. They don't care about what happens to cows in the dairy industry, or what happens to chickens in the egg industry. And that's why they are a hypocrite. So vegetarian, if they look into it, really, they know that they should be vegan for the animals. Do you think using the word diet is necessary when it's a lifestyle? It's actually neither. I hear both. I hear a vegan diet, which I just explained by explaining that the diet is only one aspect of it, and the diet is actually a plant-based diet. And veganism is not a lifestyle either, because that doesn't sound right, and it's not what it is. You don't live a non-racist lifestyle or a non-sexist lifestyle, do you? So we're talking about an injustice, and that's why it's neither one of those things. Unfortunately, we do have to use the word vegan to be identified, because the majority of this world is not vegan, and it doesn't work like any other injustice, because we don't call people non-racist. We just call them like normal people, rational, sane people. If somebody is being a racist, then we call them a racist. Like, we label the people that are committing the injustice. But in this case, we are the vegans. But veganism, if you want to explain it to someone, is not a lifestyle. It's a stance you take against animal exploitation or animal cruelty, or against this injustice that the animals are faced with. So it's really a stance you take against it, and you're actively doing something about it. That's what it is. But yeah, of course, it does bring about a lifestyle, and there is a diet aspect to it, of course. But I would never explain veganism as a lifestyle. I would never refer to it as a lifestyle. Alright, I think I'm gonna wrap this up. There are some questions still in here, but some of them are just cut off and some of them are not relevant. Alright, thanks everyone for joining me for this one, and I'll see you next week.